Well, good morning, and thank you for joining us today. As always, we are delighted to have this time to be able to connect with you, and I'm happy to see so many familiar names on the call, as well as many new attendees. For those who don't know me, I am Bruce Anthony, and I'm one of the trainers with CERVIS Technologies. And before we jump right in, I want to make sure you know that I have several colleagues on the call today who can answer your questions directly via the Questions tab, which you should see under or next to the hand-raising icon. So please feel free to ask away throughout the webinar. They will answer your questions directly, and if those are appropriate for the entire group, they'll also pass them along to me. If you have to leave before you receive a response, our customer support team will reach out to you after the webinar. You may already be aware of this, but we do have all of our past recorded webinars available as well on our YouTube channel. If you go to video.servicetech.com, that will take you there. You can also just go to YouTube and search for CERVIS Technologies. We'll take a look at this at the end of the time today as well, but just wanted to make sure you're aware that all of those past recorded webinars are also available. All right, with that said, let's kind of jump into our topic for today. So in this month's webinar, we'll be overviewing the topic of group management. By the end of our time, you'll have the tools you need to address many different scenarios using groups to aid you in your workflow. So we'll talk through how to create groups, either manually or by using the group request form to collect that information. We'll address what features a group contact has access to. We'll look at how to use a group for bulk registrations or reservations, depending on how much individual data you need to engage. And then at the end, we'll go over what reporting options are available for groups specifically. Now, in CERVIS, how you engage with groups really depends on a decision tree of 3 different questions. First, do you care to manage the groups as an administrator, or do you want a group leader to manage their own group? Next, do you care to know all of the individuals within a group, or does simply knowing a number of volunteers attending suffice? And lastly, is the group working within the bounds of an existing opportunity in your system, or do they need a private event? The answers to these 3 questions don't always have to be the same, but they will dictate how you engage that group in CERVIS and what features you use to get there. So let's start breaking this down from the top. So do you want to manage the group, or do you want them to manage themselves? Let's come back to the case of groups managing themselves at the end. And let's start off by talking about managing the group as an administrator. There are a number of ways to create groups in CERVIS, but if you are managing the group, the most obvious one is to create it manually. So under Attribute Management, you have Group Management, and in this menu, under the standard options, you can just add a new group. So if you're creating a group manually, just click on that button. It'll ask you for the name of the group, if it's a particular school or church or club or corporate partner, whatever it may be. Put the name of the group in there. Input the group contact. This person should be your point of contact. In a scenario where you don't know anyone, you can always put your own name here. Volunteers don't see who this contact person is, but generally you'll want to list the point of contact that you're engaging with. If that person doesn't already have an account, so if you search for them by name and you don't see them, then you can always create a profile for them on the right-hand side. Click on Add Volunteer Profile, and then just quickly fill this out. You don't have to fill out everything. As an administrator, when you're creating a profile for a volunteer, all you need is last name, first name, primary phone. I would treat email address as a required field. That's how volunteers log in on their own. So if you have those 4 items, you can really leave the rest of this blank. That's up to you. If you want some more information in there, you already have some of that info. Of course, you can feel free to put that in. Now, one thing I want to point out about group contacts is their access level. By default, everyone in CERVIS has a volunteer access level. You can increase that in certain circumstances if you want to give this person more access to the system. So for example, with a group contact, if you just want them to be a point of contact, they don't need to necessarily do anything else, maybe just see who's in their group and register people for events, you can just leave them as a volunteer. They'll have permission to do that just by the nature of being listed as a contact. But if this person needs to be able to manage the group a little bit more fully, Again, we're going to kind of come back to that at the end today, but you could give that person group leader access, and that would allow them to manage their group a little bit more fully. You can kind of think of them as like a mini administrator for just the members of their group. They'll be able to manage their profiles and run reports for their group and that sort of stuff. Okay, so that's the contact person. You can add an alternate group contact if you would like to. They're functionally the same. It's just if you need to have 2 points of contact listed here. The group type can be listed as either public or private. If a group is public, that means that volunteers could ostensibly claim to be a part of that group without you having to add them to it. So that's only really the case if you put groups on your application. Groups do not have to be on your application, but if they are and the group is public, then volunteers can self-select and say, yes, I'm a member of that group. If a group is private, then of course you can add people to it from the back end. You can have them added automatically using a couple different mechanics, but the volunteers won't be able to see this themselves or add themselves to it. The group status should generally be active, of course, if you're creating a new group. If you have a corporate partner who's moved away or merged with some other organization or dissolved, you can always mark a group as inactive. That way they don't show up in some of the common searches that you might run. But of course, they're still in the system for reporting, and you can still make changes and all that sort of stuff. Group notes, of course, are optional, as it says here. These are just information about the group. You don't have to put anything in here. The group contacts and the group members cannot see this information by default. There is a scenario where you can allow group contacts to see this information, but they don't generally have that permission by default. So you can take notes about the group itself, how they function, what they're good at, things like that. And then tags are a way for you to categorize your groups. So if this is a school that I'm building in, I might want to use a tag for schools. Tags are the same throughout different parts of the database. We've done a webinar on this in terms of how you engage tags with volunteers and how you engage tags with opportunities. They're very similar with groups. You can identify, sets of groups using tags. So let's say there's a particular district that you want to track for, a school, then you could input that as a tag, or maybe this is instead a corporate partner, or more particularly, it's a bank. You can add in lots of sorts of tags here that would allow you to search through your sets of groups and then run reports on those groups, or maybe just contact a certain set of groups at one time. This is really a pretty invaluable tool. There's a lot of things that you can do with this in terms of categorizing your groups and then running searches and running reports. So I'd encourage you to think through this a little bit, but you can never overuse this, in my opinion. There's no cap on how many tags can be added to the system. All right, so once you've input this information, click on Add Group. That'll create the group. So you'll get a notification here, group successfully added. We could click here to manage this group, but to show the steps kind of full-fledged, if we back up one section, you'll see the groups that we've added are on this page. We see the name of the group contact, and then from here, there's some managerial options. Right, so this is one way to add groups into the system. Just manually add the group from the admin side. Another way to have groups added, which requires a little bit more input from the groups themselves, is by using what's called the group request form. So the group request form is a standalone form that you can choose to post on your website or just link out in certain circumstances. You could send a group to this page. What I typically recommend is that on your website, you actually have a link for groups if you want to use this form. Basically a link for groups to engage with you by using this form. So you can have this posted, and then a group would essentially just fill this out with their information. Now, what data is on this form is a little bit up to you. There are some required fields, but you can also specify some instructions up at the top of the page here if you need some more specific information or just want to be clear about what you're looking for. But this form asks the person who's filling it out for the name of their group, and then their contact information. So you'll see this is last name, first name, primary phone, and email. And that's enough to create a profile for this person in CERVIS. So it will make an account for this person if they don't already have one. Below that, the rest of these questions are up to you. These are all custom questions. There's some default ones of desired participation level, which would be kind of like their frequency, and then approximate group size. But of course, you can ask for other things through here as well. These questions, again, all 4 of these are things that you can edit. And then the comments section is, of course, exactly what it sounds like. Volunteers or groups who are filling this out can just provide you some more information if they'd like to. Now, when this form gets submitted, it will show up to you as an administrator when you log in as a follow-up. So under the volunteer management heading from the main dashboard, there's an option to view and manage volunteer follow-ups. And if you have any notifications in here, so anything assigned to you specifically, you'll see this icon flashing. And if we click into this form or into this menu, you'll see that group requests show up in here. You'll see the person who filled out the form on the left, who it's assigned to, and then on the right, all the information from the form. So when did they actually fill it out? What information did they give you? So the name of their group, and then the answers to those custom questions. And then, of course, any comments they've added in as well. So this data being here is great just as a reference, but there's also an option to click to create a group using this information. So this is where you can use that data to actually build a group into the system. So if we click here, that'll take us to the same menu we looked at earlier for adding in a group, but now you can see this has been automatically populated. We have the name of the group based on how the person wrote it in. We have that person listed as the contact. And then, of course, you can change whether it's public or private, whether it's active or inactive. And then, of course, the notes are all the other data from that form. And then you might add some tags in here if this is like a church group or some kind of partner for some program that you're doing. You can add more tags in through there. So this just kind of truncates your process for creating the group and allows the group to give you information at the front end, which you can then use to influence how you engage that group. So those are 2 different ways to add groups, again, under the auspice that you are managing your groups and volunteers aren't managing, or groups aren't managing themselves. So those are 2 different ways for groups to be added. Now, once a group has been added to the system, we bring ourselves to the next question. Do you care to know all of the individuals within the group who's working with you? Or does simply knowing a number of volunteers attending suffice? So if you just care to know the number of volunteers attending, what you can do is basically a bulk registration, and you can do that directly through this menu, or you can do it directly through the opportunity that you're signing that group up for. So let's say that this group wants to bring 45 volunteers to an event, and I don't need to know who the individuals are. I can use this group, and then on the left-hand side, there's a shortcut to go in to register for an opportunity. I can click on that. Up at the top here, I can select an upcoming event, so I won't see any events in the past through here. I'm only seeing things that are upcoming. If I need to do some retroactive registrations, I would need to do that through the event itself, but you can do that. But if this is an upcoming event, I can select the event through here, input how many volunteers they wanted to bring, add a registration note if I want to, and then just sign them up. So again, this is a bulk registration. I do not know who these 45 participants are. I'm not planning to capture that information. I just wanted to know that 45 people were going to be there as representatives of this group. And if that's all that you need, you're basically done at this point. So if you don't need individual volunteer information, you just do a bulk registration like that, and then you're done. Let's say I do care to know who those 45 people are. Maybe I need them to sign my terms. Maybe I need emergency contact information or just their contact information so that I can reach out to them and use them as a resource and maybe invite them to other events individually. In the situation or the scenario where you do care to know who those individuals are, we wouldn't do a bulk registration like this. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this registration. And what we would do in that scenario is actually create a reservation. So, I should back up. There are 2 ways that we can engage that scenario where I care to know who the individuals are. And that brings us to that third question. Is the group working within the bounds of an existing opportunity in your system, or do they need a private event? So if that group is working within the bounds of what you're already doing, you already have an event established and they want to bring, like we just looked at, 45 people to an existing event. That's when I would use a reservation. So a reservation in Service falls under the Opportunity Management heading, and we have reservation management here. And if we open this up, we can create a reservation code, which allows us to then save spots for that group. And so essentially we can carve out 45 positions for that group and then allow them as individuals to fill in those positions. So this workflow requires, of course, that a reservation code exists. For this group, I just created that group, so I've obviously not created a reservation for them in the past. If a group has worked with you in the past and you've already made a reservation, you can always reuse it. You do not need to make new reservations every time. But I do need to make a new code here. So what we'll do is under Standard Options, click on Add New Reservation. And then from here, we create the reservation code. So we identify the code itself. So this group is called Calvary. I tend to use the name of the group or something that's kind of legible that they could identify as a part of the code. You don't have to. You can really write in whatever you'd like to. The code is one way for people to access the spots, but generally I like to send out a direct link instead as sort of like an invite. It's a little bit more white glove, a little bit more specific. You can allow people to have like a landing page, and we'll get there more in a moment. But usually I like to make the code something that is kind of legible. So maybe it would have like the group's name or some kind of correlation or something that's associated with them. The description is really just for you. So who did you make the code for? What's the group name? Maybe you want some more information in there. This is really just for you. The contact person, I typically make the same as the group name or as the group contact. This person will have permission to see who has used their code, but it's not going to be pinging them every time somebody registers or anything like that. It's just a nice way for them to check on who has used the code. The group association means that any person who registers for an event using this reservation code will get added into that group automatically. So this is one of those mechanics I was talking about earlier, where if you have a private group, you can still have volunteers added to it kind of automatically if they use, for example, a reservation code associated with that group. You can create an expiration on your reservation if you need to. So let's say you have a group who consistently overextends, or they say they're bringing more people than they wind up, or maybe just the position that you're trying to fill is pretty critical and you need to make sure that all the positions get filled. What you can do is set up the reservation to expire a certain number of days before the event, and then that would essentially allow the general public to access those spots that were unfilled by the group that was trying to reserve them. You do not have to set an expiration on a reservation. You can make it no expiration, and then that reservation code could even be used day of with walk-in volunteers through the sign-in console. So if we create this code here, all we've done is create a code. It says we've successfully created that, but we haven't actually reserved any spots yet. I can click in here to go to manage the reservation, but again, I kind of want to show the standard steps as well. So if we back up, you can see the code that we created here, and then to the left, there's an option to manage this reservation code. And if we click into that, that will take us to a page where we can then go and select an opportunity and input how many spots we want to save or reserve, and then click to assign that to the reservation. Now, a very important note, there have to be that many spaces available on the event for you to create a reservation of this size. So there aren't that many spots left on this event. So if I click to assign, well, apparently there are, but if I choose a different event here with not that many spots available, it's essentially going to give you an error and just say, hey, there aren't that many spots available. You need to input a value of this or less. So depending on the availability of the event, you'll see that message if you are exceeding what's available. And that's just because you're asking volunteers to sign up for an event that might already have a limit. So of course you can't exceed that limit. If you do, you can always go in and update the event, change the number of spots available, and then go through and create your reservation from there. Now, once we've made a reservation here, those spots have been set aside. So volunteers who are looking at this event, cannot access those spots that we've saved unless they know what this code is or they use a direct link that you send to them. So these are set aside for this group now. You can adjust the number through here. You can increase that or decrease that. You can also do that through the event itself. So if we click into this event and we go to view the registered volunteers, we can see any reservations that have been placed on this event. And we can see, how many spots have been consumed using those reservations, how many of those have actually been filled up or used versus those that are still available, or how much there was initially. So you can see that data through here. If it's a time slot event, you'll see that at the top of each time slot as well. So you can kind of get information about that reservation code, who the group is, who the contact is, kind of directly on the page where you're viewing registrations. And then if someone has used a reservation, you will also see that relayed on this page. So when someone signs up using a reservation code, you'll see that next to their registration. And of course, this is something that you can report on independently. Okay, a couple more notes about reservations. You can create basically direct links that you send out to volunteers, and that's typically how I would invite people to sign up using a reservation. So next to each of these reservation codes, you can see there's a link icon here. And if we click on this, there's two versions of the link. They both basically do the same thing. There's just a long form and short form. But if we copy this out, I'm going to open up an incognito so that I'm logged out. But if we go to that link, you'll see it takes us directly to the event listing page and automatically applies a reservation code. So from whichever one we had selected. And now all we see here are the spots that were saved using that code. So a volunteer wouldn't need to know some extra process. They don't need to know to go and search for something in particular. You can just send them straight to the page where you want them to be and the events that you want them to engage with. So some of that kind of white glove experience or inviting groups and having a specific landing page for them comes with this. You can add images to a reservation code. Typically, I would use someone's logo, and then that would essentially show up on the page where the reservation is being employed. So if we look at this reservation code and we grab that same link, so the reservation code link, I'm going to copy that out again, open up an incognito so I'm logged out, and then go to that link. You can see that it's the same page, the event listing page. Now we've got a different reservation code that's been applied, and we have their logo showing up here. So again, to add an image to a reservation code, you'll see next to each reservation this image icon, add or update reservation photo, and you can just click on that and add a photo through here. So I typically like to use logos for organizations, but obviously that can house any kind of image. Okay, so that's creating a reservation. Again, what we're talking about here is you're managing the group, you want to know who the individuals are, and they're working within an event that you've already created that's already been established. If instead you want to create a private event for this particular group, what you would do is just create an event like normal. So again, if this group is working with you and you want to know who the individuals are, but they're not operating within your sort of standard events, they're not consuming spots that you already have posted, you need to make a private event for them. All you would do essentially is make an opportunity for that group. It can be a normal event, it could be a time slot event, but you basically just build out the shifts the same way you would any other event, except that to make this a private event, you would choose not to publish this online and instead send out the private invite for this event. And then also under the advanced options, you have the ability to assign an associated group. So you can look up that group by name. And this is another one of those mechanics that will automatically add people into this group. So anyone who registers for this event will automatically get added into this group if they're not already a part of it. So those are kind of the two things that you need to do to make this a private event. Just associate the group with the event and then really not publish the event. And then otherwise you build it out like normal. And then once it's been established, once you've created the event, then you can send out a private invite. Every event in your system has the option to send out a private invite or private registration code. You can get there a couple different ways. If you view opportunity details, this kind of preview icon here, you'll see the link down at the bottom of this page. There's this private registration code, and there's a link icon here, and you can use that to go directly to this particular event, even if it is not posted publicly. But you'll also see that same link. If we click into manage an event, click on the name of an event, or over here on the left-hand side, click manage opportunity. That takes you to sort of the main menu for the event. And on this page, you have an option to, down at the bottom, open up the private registration code link. So same exact thing that we just looked at. And just to show you, this will take someone directly to the event. So if I open this up and we open up an incognito again to be logged out to kind of simulate a volunteer, that goes straight to the registration page for this event. So they don't have to select anything else. They're just going straight to that page. And then there's one other option for sending out that link. There's an option in here to send a private registration code invitation email. So this email is just a prefabricated message. You can edit what this intro text is in the system configuration, but the rest of this email is just all the details on the event. So the name of the event, the date and time, the description, the location, and then also instructions on how to register using that private invite link that we've just looked at. Okay, so we've talked through a couple scenarios now. All of this under the guise of you managing the volunteer or managing the group from the admin perspective, whether you want to know who the individuals are or just have a number. And then if the group is signing up with you as individuals, do you create a private event for them like we just looked at? Or do you create a reservation within existing events? So those are kind of the different scenarios we've walked through. There's one other kind of scenario starting back at the top. Do you want the group to manage itself? So if you want a group to manage itself, you have some settings to kind of permit that in the system configuration. So under system management, if we go into edit system configuration, there's a section in here called group management settings. This section also contains where your group request form is located. So if you want to enable the group request form, identify who gets the notification, add some instructions, and edit those custom questions, that's all done through here. But there is also a setting in here down at the bottom that says allow group self-registration. So if you want groups to be able to register themselves for events, there are a few options within here. You can have this set to no, which is the system default, or any of these yes options, which would allow the group to do some kind of action on their own. So obviously there's 4 different ways to use this. There are 2 options that say create and. So you have create and register and create and reserve. These options allow any person, so any volunteer, when they are signing up for an event, to label themselves as a group. They basically can create a group. They can give it whatever name they want to, and then they can sign up X number of volunteers, whatever they put in there. Obviously, it has to fit within the bounds of the event. So the event has to have that much space available. And there are some other parameters, like if there's restrictions on the event, they might not be able to do that. But if this is set to create and register, that will allow any volunteer functionally to create a group and then do a bulk registration. So when they're signing up, they could say, I'm signing up Bruce's family for 15 people. And they could do a registration like that, where they essentially just blanket consume those positions. They're not asked to gather any other information. You're not asking for more volunteer information. They basically just do a bulk registration. So it's a pretty loose setting as far as control goes from the admin perspective, but it is pretty useful if you do need to allow groups to just operate completely independently. So create and reserve is another way to do that a little bit differently. This would allow any volunteer, again, to create a group and then reserve X number of spots for their group. With this setting employed, a volunteer, again, can just label themselves as a group. They can create a new group, and then they can create a reservation. They don't actually have to functionally know that they're creating a reservation. They just input a number, and then the system will automatically create a reservation code associated with their group and email that person the reservation code link and then ask them to have their volunteers fill out the rest of the information. So it's sort of the same process as you sending out a reservation and having volunteers fill it out. It would just allow a volunteer to take that same action on behalf of their group and kind of generate the reservation code automatically. Again, this is still with that create and, so any person can say that they're representing a group and create a group in your console. So still a little bit loose. The other two options are just reserve only or register only. What both of these require is that the volunteer is already a contact for a group. So if you want to maintain sort of some of that process on your end, where you have to create the group first, and then once you've created the group, then that person can do a reservation for their group or a bulk registration. This kind of just cuts it in half. So instead of any person being able to create a group in the system, you still have to make them, whether it's through the group request form or just manually adding it on the back end. But this would allow them to then, once they are a group contact, to do a reservation or a bulk registration on behalf of their group. So just to show you real quick, I have this turned on in my system to, yes, reserve only. So from the volunteer's point of view, when someone's looking at the event listing page, if they go to register for an opportunity, it will show them at the bottom, sign up as a volunteer or sign up as a group. This button appears because I have this setting turned on to one of the yes options. So if you have it set to no, this button just won't appear. But if someone clicks sign up as a group, they'll go through the same sort of process. They're logging into an existing account or they're creating a new profile if they don't already have one. And then once they're logged in, again, in my system, someone has to already be a group contact. There's no option to add a group through here. But if someone is a group contact, in my console, I happen to be for 2 here. But if they already are a group contact, they can select that group, select the opportunity, and then click to sign up, inputting the number of people they want to register. So basically they just put a number in here. Again, they still have to meet the limits of the event. So this only has 24 spots. I can't do more than 24. And if there's restrictions on the event, they might not be able to do this as a bulk registration. If it's a reservation, then the volunteers would still have to meet those requirements too. So this basically just creates a reservation code automatically because that's how I have my system set. And then it tells them to check their email for more instructions on how to fully register all of their group members. And that email basically tells the group contact, hey, pass this on to your other volunteers and use this link and have them sign up. Because again, in this scenario, I'm looking to capture the individual volunteer info. I want them to sign my terms. I want their contact info. I want all the individuals as opposed to just a number. So from the back end, if we go ahead and look at this from the admin perspective now, and we go to reservations, we can see that there's a new reservation code that was created automatically. So it's kind of like the name of the group with some other information there. You can see it says auto created. So we know that the system created this. And if we go into manage the reservation code, we can see the reservation that was created, how many spots were reserved. And again, we still see this in the same sort of manner on the event itself. If I go to view the registered volunteers, we can see the reservation code that was created and how many spots were reserved. Okay. All right, so the last thing that I want to look at today is reporting with group information. And there's really a couple different ways that you can run reports in Service for groups. The majority of those things are related to reporting on hours, and they're found in the report management section. But I do want to point out that in the group management section, you have the ability to create a spreadsheet. So you can download a group spreadsheet. And basically this just contains information about the groups, like when they were created, how many, or like the contact for the group, the name of the group, tags on there, things like that. So you can export group information using this tool if you'd like to. Otherwise, if we're talking about reporting on hours and their participation, there are 2 main reports that you might use. So under the volunteer management heading in report management, we have kind of 2 reports I want to direct you to. One, if we scroll down a bit, number 4 is this group participation report. And using this report, you have the ability to look up a group by name So you can search for a particular group if you would like to, and then essentially just run a report on their activity. What this will do is pull up the hours served by the group in bulk, so bulk registrations, as well as hours by individuals within the group. So one thing that's important to know about this particular report is that we're not identifying only hours that were served by the group kind of in bulk. If an individual within this group came and worked with you independently, those hours would also get attributed to that group because they are a member of that group. So it's basically just running a search for all the members of that group and showing you all of their activity, as well as any bulk group registrations. Now, aside from just searching for a group by name, you can also do some searches in here. You can do a group keyword search, so find all the groups with a particular keyword in the name. But you can also search by tag. So if you've identified a bunch of groups with a particular tag, you can use that and then report on all the groups with that tag. One also other important thing to note about this report will give you totals on a per group basis, but not a total at the bottom for all of the groups. And that's because a volunteer can be a member of multiple groups, in which case their hours will show up in multiple places. So getting a total at the bottom of this report for multiple groups isn't really a valuable number because it could have duplicated hours. Okay, another group report that you can run is actually using this first type, the custom participation report. We have done a webinar on this report kind of as a whole, so that's going to be a good tool if you want to go this route as well. But this report allows you to run searches for sets of volunteers, sets of groups, sets of opportunities, or even a particular reservation code. So something that's kind of nice with this report is maybe I don't want to see all the hours that were served by all of the members of this group, but only hours that were served using this reservation code, right? So I could run a search for that particular reservation code or a set of reservation codes if you want to. And then we can go back into reporting and say, use my previous registration search, which is really reservations. And then this report will now only show me registrations completed using that particular reservation code. So it's a way to sort of parse out group participation with individuals who maybe are a part of a group, but also work with you independently. Okay, and like I said, we have a lot of information about this type of report specifically and how to run this and what all options exist. But if you're running reports on groups, you can run a search for a set of groups or just say include all of your group activity, and that would be all your bulk group registrations as well. Okay, so we're going to move into some questions next. So a question was asked about how volunteers can interact with groups in terms of adding them to their profile. It's a great question. I alluded to this, but I didn't show it. So let's actually take a look at it now. If we look at the volunteer application page, and if you have groups on your application, you will see a section that says volunteer groups. Just as a note, you can modify that language somewhat if you'd like to. Just go through our customer support team. But in here, a volunteer can look up a group by name and then add it when they're creating their profile. So they can search for a group through here. If you have a very small number of groups, that might just show up as a checklist. So volunteers could go through and select as many as they want to, kind of like the availability above that. But otherwise, a volunteer would search for the group by name and then add that to their profile when they're creating an account. Same kind of thing exists when a volunteer is updating their profile. So if a volunteer logs into their account, I'm just going to switch from my admin profile to view as a volunteer. A volunteer can update their profile and they can essentially manage, that information. So if they go into view or update their profile information, from there, they can do the same sort of thing. They can see what groups they're in. If they want to remove those, they can. If they want to go through and add more, they can go and search for those and select them. So again, if someone has automatically been added to a group that is public, they could remove themselves from it. If it's a private group, they won't see it listed here. So if you're having people added to groups automatically using reservations or private events, they might still be able to see those on their profile if they're public, and if you have groups on the application in the first place. So I do want to show in the system configuration under system management, there's a section called information collection, which is really where you can customize what data is on your application. And in here, there's an option to include group selections or the group selection options when someone is creating or updating their profile. And so this can be set to no, yes optional, or yes required. If it's set to either of these yes options, volunteers will be able to see this on their profile when they're creating an account or when they're updating their account later. But if it's set to no, whether or not a group is public or private, volunteers will never see those on their account because they're not a part of their profile as far as they know. Okay, very good question. So, of course, feel free to continue asking questions, but I think we're going to wind down here for today. I do want to point out some resources that are available to you. So whenever you're logged in to your account, at the bottom of the page, you will see this need help option. And this is how you engage with our customer support team. So if we go ahead and open this up, it says, how can we help? And you can type in questions or topics through here. We have a lot of articles on all sorts of different subjects. So especially if you like to have written instructions on particular subjects or how a volunteer can do this or how you can do that for a volunteer, you can add that information or look at that information through here. There's a lot of good data in here. But regardless what you've searched by, you can always click on contact us at the bottom to submit a ticket to our customer support team, and they'll get back to you right away. They have posted hours of Monday through Saturday, 8:30 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. Mountain Time, and they are very quick and very helpful. So feel free to use this as often as you need. Apart from that, I also mentioned at the top our YouTube channel. And again, if you go to video.servicetech.com, that will take you there. You could also just go to YouTube and search for Service Technologies, but that will take you to our YouTube channel. We have a lot of posted tutorials on here. All of our previous webinars get posted up here. We have different playlists on different subjects. We have an entire playlist on group management as well. So feel free to poke around there, especially if you want to learn more about some of the stuff that we talked about today and didn't go into in great detail. This is a good resource. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining today. Of course, it's always a pleasure to be able to see you all and get to engage with you through these webinars. We're grateful for the work that you're doing, and we're happy to be partnered with you. So thanks so much for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday, and we look forward to meeting again in the next month.